morning, everybody. First, I'd like to thank everybody for coming out to the bi-weekly Joe Mack Fan Appreciation Day. Milk and cookies will be served afterwards. I think I'll just open up the questions and get started, see where we go.
Hey, thousands of fans are calling for your firing. What do you say to them?
I say I understand that you're disappointed, so am I, and frustrated, so am I, and you know, that's something I can't control. I will say I've seen some things recently about, in particular, our board of directors, and I just like to say publicly that I've had the opportunity to deal with them for the last 2.5 years. I find them extremely intelligent, hardworking, very thoughtful. They are super fans of the club. They're very aware of the legacy of the Bombers within the community. And I think the fans should know that they'll always do what they ultimately feel is best for the club. So, you know, that's not something I control, and I really don't worry about that, to be honest with you.
Joe, you're coming off one of the worst losses in franchise history, 82-year history. After you made a dramatic statement to the team about the direction, trying to get their attention, what does that say about your command of the situation or command of the team?
I don't know if that necessarily says anything about my command of the situation. I think if you take a moment to maybe go back over the last couple of years, you'll find out in the CFL, because of the nature of our game, that there have been teams that are actually playoff teams, and in fact, if you check the record, there have been Grey Cup champions that have had that type of game during the Grey Cup champion seasons. So in the CFL, sometimes that happens. Unfortunately, it was last week, and I understand how everybody would be frustrated and hurt, maybe even a little bit angry, but I think there has been, much more so than I even realized, a deep emotional component to our team. And so I think it happens in the CFL at times. I think a little bit of perspective, too, is since our game is a little bit unique in that we only have 2 downs, and so the turnover rate, if your offense is struggling a little bit, could put a lot of pressure on your defense. And then your defense is also, a large proportion of your defense is on special teams, covering the punts. There is maybe at times, and again, it's happened within the last couple of years to all sorts of different teams, the defense gets maybe a little bit worn down. So I think that is why sometimes you'll see even good football teams have a day like that. It's not acceptable, but it happens.
Did you expect the opposite reaction?
I did. Yeah, I was surprised, and I was. You know, I can't explain it. It's one of those things where, you know, you're just flabbergasted when it happens, and I didn't see it happening at all. I thought we had a really good week of practice, to be honest with you. I thought the morale was good. I thought the players were up. I thought the coaches were up. I do think for our fans, I've had a chance to reflect upon, you know, where we are at this point and maybe why. And I think that obviously no one likes to be 2-7. We're going to do everything we can to, you know, correct that. I think we still have an opportunity. We're only halfway through the season. God bless the CFL. We're only 1 game out of a playoff spot. So those are things that I think positives that we could try to build towards, and you know, we have a half season still to go. Having said that, and upon reflection for the team, we've had a fairly rough year for the psyche of the team, and obviously, as everyone knows, it's been well documented. I think it started with the death of Coach Richard Harris. I knew that would have a big impact on our players. As I reflect back on a number of different things that occurred, I think it had a much bigger effect on the psyche of the team than I even realized. And then there were other things that maybe compounded that. There were things that was beyond the team's control. We had a lot of injuries. You know, we did have the 4 games on the road, but I think there was a certain a football team, although it's a group of individuals, from my experience, kind of develops a certain psyche. And I think maybe the psyche of our team was maybe a little bit unsettled and hadn't really had a chance to totally recuperate. I'm hoping that although last week's game was painful, it was maybe somewhat cathartic for our team, and that they're able to let some of those emotions out, and they'll come back and play refreshed this week.
Are you saying the death of Richard Harris is still affecting you?
I think, Paul, that I don't know if it's. I think it had residual effects, to be honest with you. And then there are other things that compounded that. And I was aware of some of them and tried to address some of them, but you know, there was emotional feelings that I think some of the players were still dealing with, and the fact that we maybe gave them an opportunity to address them. I'm hoping it's going to give us the opportunity to turn this around. I spoke to a number of players after, the devastating loss and the coaches, and I said my impression is that we have a group of players that do care, despite the fact that we got beat badly on Sunday. And, rightly or wrongly, they agreed. And I asked the coaches the same question, and they agreed. So I think that's a positive that they do. Some people have talked about our talent level. I would disagree with some of the opinions, I think. When I break down the film, I see, guys that are playing hard, that are talented, that we just haven't got it turned around yet. We're still young, and I think, they're going to fight hard with our coaching staff to do that. I'd also like to comment that our coaching staff has acted really professionally. They're obviously somewhat embarrassed also, and they take responsibility for what happens, but they just motor on. Coach Burke's been a rock. He's acknowledged that we didn't do well, but he still thinks, as I guess he was quoted saying, "We ain't dead yet." And then there's other things you can, I think, turn to build on. We played pretty well against Hamilton. We went toe-to-toe with BC the week before, and so that's obviously, when we played so well against BC and had a legitimate chance to win, that's what was so surprising about our output in Regina. But
Joe, you fired your head coach after those two performances.
Correct.
And you're talking about it as positive, the way the team played.
Correct.
So it's a contradiction in what you're saying.
I don't think it's necessarily constructive to revisit why that decision was made. It was a thoughtful decision. And I felt that we maybe had lost a direction within the team. And so, as hard as it was, I felt we had to make a decision. And I think the team will respond very well to Coach Burke. I did hear a number of players, actually they came up to me, and one of the things that they were most hurt by their performance on Sunday was they felt they let Coach Burke down. So I have every confidence that Tim will put everything he can into changing the season around, and we'll see how it progresses. It'll be an ongoing saga for all of us, I guess.
Yesterday,
Why not Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday? There's been people waiting for answers and an explanation.
I don't know that. I think just from a philosophical standpoint of how you run the club, I don't know if it's beneficial necessarily to have the general manager come out after every game and comment. I really think that the head coach should be the person that's addressing that, and I thought it was better just to let the water settle a little bit before I came out and spoke about it.
So yesterday, Joe Mack made the playoffs, and you keep their job at the end of the season?
Again, that's beyond my control. I really think everybody should have every confidence that this board will do whatever they think is necessary for the betterment of the club. They are very, very passionate about this team, and they're intelligent and they're hardworking, they're fair-minded. I think the community should feel that they'll take a distinctive overview of what's best for the club. I think also, though, too, is just to give a little bit of perspective, respectfully, is if you look at where the club, if everybody thinks back to some degree, maybe steps back a little bit to where the club was in 2009 regarding where we were financially, where we were as a team, and maybe also go back and check that roster. I think you'll see that roster, you don't have many players from that roster right now, since then or now, making a major contribution in the CFL. So you could maybe make the case that we as an organization had to make a major overhaul of the overall roster, and I think we've done that. I think also, in fairness to the club, is last year we did attain first place for the first time in 10 years. And we went to the Grey Cup and had 9 straight sellouts. So the club as a whole must have had some idea of the direction they were going. As in life, sometimes you hit challenges that you can't foresee and you try to adjust to them. But if you're dedicated to driving for excellence, trying to be professional, trying to do things with a sense of integrity, I think you'll have a chance to right that ship, and then fate will take its course. But I think as overall the Blue Bombers have done some really good things. I'd also this is just an opportunity to touch base on some other things that I've heard or read is, and regarding the club overall, although all of us are a little bit disappointed, let's say, in regards to the stadium, I mean, it's a real compliment to the city and the province and our board of directors that we're going to have one of the finest stadiums in the CFL. And our board worked extremely hard to accomplish that. They used a lot of their own sweat and business acumen to get that accomplished, and I really think they should be acknowledged, even though we had some hiccups.
Joe, yesterday after practice, I was talking to Joe Johnson, and it's been said that you have the talent here, that you like the effort that you're seeing in the games, but clearly the results aren't happening.
Right.
So what's missing? And Joe said that he felt with the players, not everybody, but there were players who needed to develop a pride in their work. Is that a statement about maybe character issues? Do you have talent, but maybe not the personalities you need?
I think Javon may have some merit in what he just said. I think probably what it is that we are a very young team, and they haven't spent a lot of time together. And so going back to some of the unsettlement, I actually sensed it, to be honest with you, to some degree in training camp. There was something there that I just felt was missing. There wasn't, for lack of a better term, the swagger that we'd had before, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. Again, is not to go into excruciating detail, but when I started to reflect back on these last few days, there were certain. I noticed now, in hindsight, that there was a pattern there that was maybe unavoidable. It was maybe just our fate, and we had to go through this. And I'm hoping that this difficult loss will purge some of those things, and the team will come together with the coaching staff. And right now, it is up to the coaching staff and the team. There's not much more I can do as general manager, although I will totally support them through every game this year and do whatever I can to help them achieve our goal, which is to still try to get into the playoffs, and then, who knows, maybe shock some people and get into the Grey Cup.
Is there a potential that they overvalued the talent and under-evaluated the character of the players? Do you have leadership to be successful?
I think we have leadership. Character is such a difficult thing to really assess until you actually work with somebody or have them on your roster. So I don't know, you talk to coaches, you talk to people, but until you put them in that situation, you don't really know. So, you think that you have, I still have the team, and again, I can only go by this. Obviously, we haven't produced to that level yet, but the players tell me that when I ask them aside, when nobody else is around, just them and I think for the most part, in fact, that's my sense anyway, that the players are pretty straightforward with me, and I think I have a good relationship with them. They feel that they care. That we just haven't executed properly. We've had some mental lapses. That's indicative at times of a young team. I think also the fact that we were young and we went through, a lot of emotional things, or maybe can be a little bit of a breakdown, but it'll be interesting for all of us to see this Sunday if we bounce back.
Jeremy, you said that there was something that you noticed back in training camp, that maybe there was something missing. What did you do to address that then?
I started talking to him, Sarah, but there is something that, that's an organic thing. You know what I mean? So the general manager could talk to you, hey, you guys have to really, band together. You have to do this and that. And I'd like to think that I have some ability to relate to the players and for them to listen to me, but that's something that it really is. It's a group dynamic, a team. And so it just has to evolve on its own. And there's just circumstances, and as I said, even maybe a little bit of fate that comes into it. And I look back, I don't know if much could have been done, to be honest with you. It's just the dynamic of the whole group of players together evolving, and hopefully it's evolving in a positive fashion.
Was there anything you're going to change about the job that you're currently doing?
In what regard?
Scouting, marketing?
I have to admit, and I've read or heard some of this, and I don't know that anyone critiquing in a negative fashion our Canadian players is correct. And if you look at, I would suggest everybody go back and check the roster of the number of young, productive Canadian players that were on the roster in 2009 and who are still on the roster or producing to a significant fashion in 2012. And I'm going to guess you're going to find very few, if any. Now, you take into account that we had only half of our draft picks, and we have young Canadians. Like, if we only drafted Corey Watson alone, Corey Watson is a stud. I mean, he is just an absolute total football player. And if we only had him alone, we would have done a good job of improving our Canadian talent. But we also added Kito Puble, Enoch Mwamba. We took Chris Greaves in the 6th round as a defensive tackle. He's getting better and better. I believe he's going to be an all-star. We have Paul Swiston. We have, I think, two of the better Canadian running backs as a tandem that we drafted that unfortunately have been hurt, but in Carl Volney and Anthony Woodson. Renee Steffen that we drafted unfortunately got hurt, but he's going to be a good football player. So when you look at the litany of players that we've taken with only half the draft picks, and remember, anytime we make a trade, almost always I try to get Canadian draft picks because I realize how important Canadian players are. So when you take the litany of players that we brought in, I think it would be hard-pressed to say that we haven't done a good job of improving our Canadian talent, particularly considering we didn't have that many draft picks. And those guys are playing hard.
But you've had some noticeable misses.
I could.
With Jay Etienne.
I don't think you're being fair with Jay Etienne at all. It's only his second year. He only had 1 year of total college football. He's playing behind two good Canadians. He improves every day. He works his tail off. And I think he's ended up being a good football player. If you go back and check other rosters right now, you're going to find other first-round picks that were taken in that year that haven't even dressed, let alone contributed. So I think people aren't being very fair to Jade when they say that. If you come out to practice and really watch practice every day, you'll see that young man working hard, making catches, and making strides. And I would be very cautious about trying to pinpoint Jade as one player that has not produced yet, because I think he will eventually. And I think that unfortunately, for any sort of different reasons, people have kind of used him kind of as a whipping boy, which I think is unfortunate.
Joe, when Paul was fired, you said one of the reasons was because you didn't think the offense was growing. And in the Saskatchewan game, you don't score a point, and fans are saying, oh, you shouldn't have fired Paul, shouldn't have let him have the rest of the season. Do you have any doubts about that move? Of
Well,
firing Paul?
no. And again, Paul's he's a class individual. He was great for me to work with. But there was a very complex decision, and so that I feel that was the right thing to do. Obviously, the offense and the offensive staff, was disappointed that they didn't perform better. They'll address it, but no, I don't think so. That wasn't a factor in it. So it was a very complex decision, which I think we just need to move on from.
Joe, in terms of assessing your own performance, you've mentioned a number of areas where you feel you've excelled. Are there any areas you feel are room for improvement?
There's always room for improvement, I think you can only really say that once the season's over, and then because it's maybe a little bit too early to tell. There are some things that maybe in hindsight you would do differently, but even when you reflect back upon that, you try to realize that if you can, you try to bring a sense of compassion to the job and to the decisions you make, and so that sense of compassion hopefully would give you reservations about expressing everything you would do differently.
Paul, Joe, you're 17-30 is your record. Some of that obviously you believe falls on Paul. How much of it falls on you?
Well, obviously, I'm the general manager, so it's going to fall on me. If we don't get better, obviously the board will have to make some decisions. I'm the general manager, so I have to take responsibility for it.
You've had 2.5 years. How long should it take a CFL GM to show his true colors?
I don't know if there's a time frame. I think also as we go back and we forget that we did end up in first place last year, first time in 10 years. We did go to a Grey Cup. We have totally revamped the roster. We have increased the Canadian talent. So I think if we didn't have any successes at all, then that'd be merited. I think the board, I think there's a certain amount of wisdom on the board, and I think that they'll look at the entire picture.
Entire picture is 17-30.
Right, and the entire picture is also as we were in first place. We went to a Grey Cup and we made $3 million last year, as opposed to a loss of $1.6 million in 2009.
You believe you had a big hand in the drop?
I'm not saying. I think we as an organization did a great job of turning things around. And obviously, if we have sold out 9 games in a row last year and a number of games this year, the fans, to bless their hearts, think that we're going in the right direction. I would like to make a comment about our fans also. I can understand how a number of our fans are obviously disappointed and frustrated, maybe a little bit angry. Having said that, I'd like our fans to know that our players and our coaches take part of being part of a community team very, very seriously. And they are continuously, even in tough times, going out to hospitals, grade schools, and doing a lot of charity work in the community and making a commitment to the community. And I think they do a lot of great things in that regard. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't appreciate the fact that everybody wants to win, but I'm just making a point that they do add a lot to the community. Now, on the reverse side of that, our community and our fans are part of our team. They make a big, big difference when they're cheering for our players. And our players talk about it all the time. They really appreciate it when the fans cheer them on and encourage them. And I would just maybe suggest to our fans to make you realize how important you are to the team and how important the Bombers are to the community. And the team is somewhat like a family to some degree. And if your teammate or your family member is maybe struggling, what you may want to think about doing is maybe trying to support them and give them a little bit of patience and even a little bit of love, because that's what family members and teammates do. So I do think our fans will realize that our players are playing hard, and we understand their frustration and their anger, and they're going to do everything they can to change that. On a personal note, I would like to make mention that there have been a number of people over the last 2.5 years that I've had a pleasure to interact with here in the Winnipeg community that have reached out to me in a very humane and compassionate way, and I'd like to publicly say thank you to them. It meant a lot.
Are you
We
surprised
take
at
one more. We take two more. Sorry, go ahead.
Are you surprised at all that after negative reaction, we talk about the love you received from the community, and then it's really turned the tide in the last couple of weeks, especially with the demands for you to be?
Yeah, you know, that's just part of being in pro sports. You know, it's just something you have to deal with. You know, as you get older, you hope, if you're lucky, you get blessed with a little bit of wisdom. And again, you just try to think about maybe trying to bring a little bit of compassion towards them too. And so, I don't know how constructive it is to really dwell on the negative part of it. If you think about it and just give you a chance to maybe reflect upon it for a moment or two, you just try to make something, try to find a way to grow and to move forward.
Take one more.
You made any mistakes, Joe?
Yeah, I have. Sure.
You can have one back.
I'd rather not say. It would reflect. I just don't think it would be a compassionate thing to do.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Everybody have a good day.